Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. And today we're talking about a few different things, but really about abundance versus scarcity. How do you work through your organization and really come at things with a feeling of abundance and growth? And how does that play into your organization? And then we're going to talk about specifically how that interacts and engages with your grant writing. If you're afraid to go after that big grant, if things feel overwhelming to you, how can that abundance mindset really help you move through that? And to help me talk about this conversation, I am joined by Gauri Manglik. Gauri has dedicated her career to building intuitive and delightful user experiences. Seeing the opportunity to force multiply the nonprofit sector's ability to create impact through software led her to her work at Instrumental. As CEO and a co-founder, she has led Instrumental to serve over 2,000 nonprofits, making it a favorite tool among grant seekers for bringing grant prospecting, tracking, and management to one place. Before Instrumental, Gauri was CEO and co-founder of Fondue, an online community for sharing bite-sized restaurant reviews. After Fondue was required by Airbnb, Gauri led the mobile and special projects teams. So she has a lot of insight and information on how she herself has worked through the startup space, how she's kind of helped build her team, and then how you can do the same no matter what stage you are, whether you're just starting out or getting ready to scale. So I hope that you give this episode a listen. Lots of good nuggets in it. And I know that you'll just hear it and then it will kind of permeate through everything that you do on a day-to-day basis and the conversations you have with your donors and your organization. But before we get into this episode, it is brought to you by our digital marketing therapy sessions. Head on over to thefirstclick.net/office hours. Grab your time if you just need to have a bite-sized conversation with me to talk through anything. Storytelling in your grant writing, how to get your website ready to match up with your grant writing, how to kind of build in some of these elements we talk about into this episode into your organization. So again, firstclick.net/office hours. Digital marketing therapy sessions are a great opportunity to have me as a consultant in your back pocket without having to be on a big retainer. Let's get into the episode.
You're listening to the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern, and each week I bring you tips from myself and other experts, as well as hot seats with small business owners and entrepreneurs to demystify digital marketing and get you on your way to generating more leads and growing your business.
Hey, everybody, please join me in welcoming Gauri Manglik to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So you've started your own business, you're supporting nonprofits, and today we're talking scarcity versus abundance. But I'm curious as we get started, kind of, how do you work through that in your own business and your own growth? Like, kind of, where have you been in that journey and kind of working through getting to that abundance mindset?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a work in progress, for sure. And, some part of it is like, the reality is like, when you're getting started getting things off the ground, I think it's very easy to go to a scarcity mindset because you're trying to do more with less. And that's like an easy, I think, thought pattern to go down. And I think for me, the way that I think about it in the context of my own company and Instrumental is like, what can I do to feel more proactive, more from a position of strength as opposed to reactive? And that's always a challenge. And I think, one of the ways that I've thought about it in the context of Instrumental has been, with startups, and same thing with like early stage nonprofits, like a big part of it is just getting the funding to get off the ground. And there's this idea of like needing to like convince investors or needing to like convince funders or needing to like, go through this very challenging kind of power dynamic, it feels. And I think one of the things that's been important to Instrumental has been to like rewrite that story and to not come from a place where we actually need to raise external funds. So Instrumental runs profitably, runs at cash flow break even to profitable. And part of that came from this desire to actually not need to partake in that kind of like pattern, that kind of overall pattern of running a business. And so I think that's been an interesting journey.
I bet it has. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great though. So if people are hearing terms scarcity and abundance for the first time, can you maybe just give people a quick overview? Because I'm sure you're living in one of these spaces, but maybe you just aren't aware of kind of what that is.
Yeah, I think at the simplest, a scarcity mindset is where you feel like there's less to go around. An abundance mindset is where you feel like there's enough for everyone. And another way that I think about it is also like reactive versus proactive, kind of like coming from a position of where things are kind of happening to you as you're running your business, as you're running your nonprofit. The world is kind of imposing its own needs on you, as opposed to you exerting a force on the world and on what needs to change. I think those are they seem tied to me.
I agree with you so much, and I think that's so true, because especially when you're in the early stages, or if you're in like a scale stage of your organization, a lot of times you get stuck in like what has to be done right now. And that's when you get on the hamster wheel of funding and income, right? As opposed to when you continue to look a little bit forward and put strategies in place to kind of have future growth that helps you, you think, with kind of that long-term, more consistent, sustainable, whether it be donation or income into your organization.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that sometimes, even as like leaders, like as executive directors or like startup founders or CEOs, it's kind of interesting how it can sometimes feel like or it can be helpful to remind yourself that actually like everything that you're doing is like, it's your call. Like you don't have to be doing things that are putting you in a hamster wheel. You don't have to be doing things that feel more reactive. You can really change anything. It's your company. It's your nonprofit. And it's interesting how that can sometimes be hard to remember.
So that leads into my next question, which, like, when you have an abundance mindset where you really feel like there's enough for everybody, I can grow my organization. It doesn't matter what my competitors are doing, even if they're in the similar space. Like, I can do things my way, the way that I feel is the most impactful, what have you, and attaching that to your actions. Like, how does having that abundance mindset really help you with making decisions and moving through? Because you also, I feel like when you're scaling and growing, have all the things coming at you. Like, people are coming at you with all these great ideas. They're coming at you with all of these ways that you can grow. So how do you kind of stick with that and use that abundance mindset to make decisions?
Yeah, I think that one of the first ways it shows up is in, I see there's a big difference between organizations who have a proven model and then are trying to scale, and organizations that are trying to scale and do more without having proven a model. And I think the latter tends to feel like way more chaotic. It tends to feel like you're really not able to come from a position of strength because you're trying to do too much at once. And the former requires more like concentration of efforts on your strengths as opposed to trying to do everything, and a real sense of like rigor to really focus on the things that that actually are important for your organization to take on to get to the next step of proving like why this organization is like solving a real problem. One of the things that people will say is like, oh, I need to like they'll kind of jump to kind of convincing donors or convincing investors. And I think there's a really important step of like convincing yourself first and treating yourself as like the first donor. You're spending so much of your time here, or the first investor. That's like the biggest investment to make. And like really looking critically at like why you think there's a clear need in your community or in the market, and like seeing that laid out clearly, and then also being able to prove to yourself that the program that you're designing, the organization that you're designing is actually going to be solving that. So having some sort of like minimum viable way that you're able to demonstrate that to convince yourself and like prove out that model is like generally a step that I see missing in nonprofits and for-profits before kind of focusing on this like scaling piece or like fundraising piece. And sometimes you do need to fundraise a bit to like get to a place where you can like prove it, but that's really how that should be considered. It's like, what's like the minimum amount that we need to get to like prove out a certain hypotheses or, certain program success, as opposed to just like kind of taking on whatever grant opportunities or whatever is out there.
Yeah, because I feel like I love what you're saying, prove it to yourself, because if you walk into those initial conversations not feeling good about what it is that you're doing, I think, like people can sense that kind of lack of confidence. And if I'm not going to give you money for your company or sign on for your services or donate to your organization if I don't feel that you have confidence in what you're doing. Yeah. So that's like such a great, and like seems like a very obvious thing, but something that I think we forget when we're in the mud of trying to like get something up and going.
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely easier said than done. For sure. But yeah, like you want to come to a place where you're like speaking to others, potential partners or potential donors, and feeling like fully convinced and being able to point to a clear demonstration of success in some way so that that person feels like, yeah, of course, if I give you this money or if I, if I partner with you, I can see like clearly like why you're the right person for me to do that with because of like what you've done in the past.
So as a leader, as you're building your team, as you're building your board, I think that's what also makes things so complicated because the more people you bring into your organization, the harder it is to continue to move forward with like, I feel like you kind of have to pull some people along, right? You always have those naysayers. There's always at least one or two in the bunch that are going to kind of bring you down. Oh, we can't do that, or that's not going to work, or they already give money to that organization, or we'll never get that grant. How, as a leader, can you continue to provide that culture of abundance so that your whole team is kind of working collectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. Another way that I would think about it is like, how can you cultivate a culture of like taking risks as opposed to being like extremely like risk averse and being comfortable with rejection. And yeah. I think that's also something that just, it gets harder as you grow, and it's a thing that you constantly have to kind of fight against, because I think it's kind of like the natural tendency. It can be like the natural tendency of just like a group of people. It's hard to, not have at least one person who's kind of bringing up things from a more kind of pessimistic perspective. I would say the first thing is to see if that can be part of your like hiring criteria or your the way that you actually think about putting people together is this kind of mindset of like, we can actually achieve anything. We want to like focus on our strengths. We want to take risks. Like learning is an okay outcome. It's okay to fail and learn. And maybe not even just an okay outcome. Maybe that's a great outcome, right? Because that means that you've pushed move the ball forward in some way as opposed to staying stagnant. I think the second is just like managing that, continuing to manage that after you've like hired people, and to show people like what examples of that look like, so it doesn't feel like something they, some of the things that I realize when I'm maybe frustrated that somebody's not doing something a certain way, is I realize that they actually don't know what a good example of that looks like, right? And they're just kind of, they're well good intentioned, like you're bringing up concerns because you care, you don't want things to fail, and so it's not an intention problem. It's actually that it's more of like a skill, and that actually needs to be cultivated. And from you as a manager or you as a leader, being able to like point to like specific examples and talk to those examples with that person and show and like brainstorm together or discuss together what are other ways that you might actually have approached that problem, or what are other perspectives that you might have, and come at it from a coaching perspective.
That's so good. When I started bringing in like VAs and stuff into my business, I remember like being so frustrated because I'm like, why are they just not like, why is this not just naturally coming to them in what like I want them to do? And that was a good lesson for me in that is like, you don't realize the little things that you don't communicate because they come so second nature to you, but that's not second nature to everybody. So I think that's great. And I think that comes into mindset 100% too, right? Like lead by example, but you have to show and give them the tools and the opportunities to be able to grow as well, right?
Yeah. And it's really easy to, as you said, like think that the things that are second nature to you or the things that are really easy to you are the same for everybody. And I remember I was talking to one of my coaches, and I was talking to her about a person that I was having trouble with. And I kept saying something like, all she has to do is this, or all he has to do is that. And like, she helped me point out that like my default assumption is that they know what I'm asking them to do and they're just not doing it, which is like not a very, from a default assumption perspective, not the healthiest. It actually is more generous and more productive if you actually assume first that they might not even know what you're asking them for. They might not even know the expectation.
I love that. Well, let's bring this back around to fundraising, because I know Instrumental helps support nonprofits in like easing the grant writing process, but I feel like grant writing is something also that younger organizations, at least the ones that I've been blessed to be a part of throughout my career, it's like this hurdle that they don't want to cross, or it's like this feeling of, well, I won't get that grant, or I like, kind of saying no to something before they even attempt to jump into the game. And so like, what kinds of things might you say to a nonprofit? Like, you've already said one thing, which is great, where like, be okay for people to say no, like rejection is okay. At least I learned, right? So how might, like, what kind of pep talk might you give to a nonprofit that is, maybe either scared to go for that big grant that they've been wanting to, or just scared to kind of jump into that game for stronger funding?
Yeah, the first thing I'd want to understand with that organization is like, are they grant ready? And so there's a couple of things that you do actually want to make sure you have in place before you jump into the game of grants, because you want to make sure that you're set up for success. So some of those things are very like kind of obvious, like you make sure you are registered, you make sure you have like a mission statement, maybe a clear idea of like what your organization is doing, you have a board, and all that. But I think the two key things are beyond that is that track record of success. That's really important in grants, especially because you're going after institutional funders, who are sometimes there are startup grants, but like most of the time, institutional funders will be more risk averse than individuals because they're giving you larger funds. They have just like a more institutionalized process. So they will want to see that if they give you $100,000, they have a very clear reason to believe that, based on what you've done in the past, that like there's going to be something that you're going to be able to actually say what you're telling them you're going to be able to do. And then the other piece is around capacity. And capacity in one way is just like making sure if you do win grants that you're set up for success and being able to like execute on what those grants are going to be for. And also capacity in the broader sense of the overall grants process. So grants are, with any new thing that you're doing, you want to give yourself the space you want to bake in the fact that like you're not going to know everything from the beginning, and that's okay. And you need to give yourself the time to incorporate feedback into your process. And so I think like 6 to 9 months to see positive ROI on grants tends to be the minimum. And I actually advise folks to like, if they are grant ready, to actually give it closer to like a year to 2 years to apply to grants, to build those relationships, bake in that feedback that you're getting, and then continue to really build out that process and that muscle internally at the organization. Mm-hmm. So for that reason, it's often, or it may not be like literally the first fundraising channel you should pursue, right? Because you might pursue a fundraising channel that has faster feedback cycles where you can actually get something off the ground or prove something. And so usually I see folks, will kind of get to that stage like through individual fundraising in some way. And then at some point they feel ready to add on another layer and have the capacity for that. But, in terms of if somebody's ready and getting stuck, I would say the way to start would be to start small. The more grants you win, the easier it is for you to win grants, and winning your first few grants is harder. So I would actually start with the grants that may come from like more local funders, or funders where you might have some sort of relationship that you can lean on, or there's some way, maybe like a friend, a partner organization that has worked with in the past, there's some way to get a connection there. Go for like the low-hanging fruit, the smaller grant amounts that maybe are not your ideal grant in the future, but will actually get the ball rolling in terms of having you be able to demonstrate that you can like win a grant and like improve success to that funder. And then I would say that again, like the focus there should be really on learning. And if you and to have a clear hypothesis for every grant that you pursue. You're coming from a position of strength that you should apply to grants where it feels like it's a no-brainer for the funder to fund you. And if that ends up being true, awesome, you're right. And if that ends up not being true, to really understand, like, from a position of just like learning, like what happened, like be curious. Like if sometimes it's not easy to get in touch with the funder to get that feedback, but that's obviously something that I would try. But what are there other ways that you might get some signal on how you could improve? Maybe it's talking to like a grant writing consultant, getting their tips, or a coach. Maybe it's just like looking at other organizations that funder has funded more closely and really just like really being critical on if there truly was mission alignment between what you're doing and that funder, and then just like baking that into the process. So overall would be to like make sure you're grant ready and like start small and just focus on learnings and just expect that it's going to be it's going to take a lot of at-bats to build that muscle.
I kind of equate that mindset to like my daughter's really big into musical theater. And so I kind of equate it to like she's now auditioning at our local theater, but we're kind of working our way up, like going and, we've thrown out like, let's just go audition at this bigger company and just see what happens. If you get something, great. If not, then you've learned kind of something that you can do to better yourself. And I feel like relationship building and nonprofit, making those big asks, grant writing is almost sort of flexing that same muscle. If you can come into it with the mindset of like a rejection or a no is an opportunity to learn, not they think we're bad at what we do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think that maybe this is true with other forms of fundraising too, but I kind of see with grant writing, and this I see this also with like copywriting, like with marketing copywriting. Curious to hear your thoughts that because anyone can technically write copy, you kind of underestimate that it's actually hard to write really good copy. And so I see that with grants too, where folks will come in with like, they can technically write a grant and like send out like 10 proposals, and then they'll get, rejections, and then they'll get really discouraged. And they just haven't like invested in like actually kind of building that muscle and like teaching themselves, and haven't really been okay with that learning process.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. We work with clients on building their promo kit that they can share with their board members, with their volunteers, with whomever, that has all of the copy that they need so everybody can speak the same language. But we really drive home that value-driven storytelling, as opposed to, I think, to your point, nonprofits, and especially like the technical grant writers, will make it very me-centric. They feel like I have to talk about myself and all of the things, instead of really sharing the impact and the story in a way that evokes emotion or evokes, something that's going to make you feel more connected to that organization. So I think you're 100% correct. And I think similarly to how you would write a promo kit for your marketing, for your campaigns, for whatever, you can create the same thing in all of your different areas of fundraising, including grant writing, which will then, I think, all the major organizations that are writing a lot of grants do that, so they can pull all of their things together. So your confidence and your feeling when you're going after some of these things is like, okay, well, I might have to tweak a thing here or there, but I've largely got all of this done. And I know that these types of things, these words, these stories that our organization tell have already proven to fund. So, like you said, gets the ball rolling, gets things moving. But yeah, that copy piece, I think, and that personality is very underutilized.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a good point, which is like being empathetic to the person that you're speaking with and like really connecting to like what they care about is, I think, a much more effective approach, as opposed to kind of just like describing yourself. And the same thing with like instrumental as a product, right? Like we can like just like kind of list out our features, right? And like how the product works, but really what people care about is how it's going to like impact them and like change their workflow, their lives for the better. And like one like way that I think that could also come about is just like also more proactive, like nurturing of your donors and of your funders. So like if you let's say you win a grant, of course they're going to have like an end of the grant period, like report, maybe like a midterm report. But like if you're doing great work and you're putting together these, these marketing materials and other angles, it makes sense for you to like continuously almost like nurture that relationship and take on the kind of work of that, if you're really being empathetic to that funder, right? Like that's what they are trying to get from you, even if they're not like asking for it.
Yeah. I love like all of the things and the little nuggets in this conversation because I think abundance just really plays, like when you have that abundance mindset, it plays into so many things like you talked about, like being proactive, having better confidence, being able to go after the bigger things. And I just think now that people have started to hear this, I think it'll start to like percolate into all of their conversations. They'll start to see it more, right? It's just like when you decide you're going to buy a Toyota, all of a sudden you see the Toyotas everywhere. Now you're going to see like abundance versus scarcity in all of your conversations. But if you are going to kind of leave people with one final thought about either how this has impacted your business and your growth, or ways that they can continue to live this in their day-to-day, like what would you say to folks?
Yeah, I would say I think this is this comes from like some kind of war philosopher, right? Where you like kind of take on battles that you can win. And I think that another way to think about it is to like really focus on your strengths and your differentiators. When you're starting off when you're on the smaller end, like you are working with less, you don't have a ton of levers to pull, a ton of resources, but a really important lever is basically what you decide to work on, and like the scope of that. So I think my general take is that it's always better to do fewer things better, and the fewer things that are really causing your organization or your company to be differentiated in the community or in the market, so that you're actually like there's like a clear reason for like why you need to exist, a clear problem that you're solving. And I would try to place more of your efforts on doing fewer things that really showcase that, as opposed to like trying to do more things.
That's so good. Well, if people want to find out more about you and Instrumental, how do they do that?
Yeah, you can go to instrumental.com. It's spelled instrument and then the letter L.com. And we have a 14-day free trial. So if you're interested in accelerating your grants process, you can check us out totally for free. And it's a totally risk-free trial. So at the very least, you'll come away with some opportunities for you to pursue. At the very most, hopefully, you'll find that on top of finding great opportunities, it'll basically create a system for you to be successful over the years, helping you build a grant calendar, collaborate with your team, and just be more strategic with grants overall. And we have a special link and coupon code that I'll send to you after. That would be great to include in the show notes for folks. So if you do decide to move forward with a subscription, you'll get a bit of a discount. And even if you're not ready to take the jump and like really go after grants, you can check out our blog. It's instrumental.com/blog. We have a ton of free resources there to just teach you about the grants process, to help you understand if you are grant ready. And we have webinars almost every week at this point from different experts that will teach you about different aspects of grants and basically coach you through it. And so it can just get the seeds planted for whenever you are ready to pursue it.
That's awesome. And we'll have all of this linked up at thefirstclick.net/176. So you can check that out. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
I'm so thankful to Gauri for joining me today. It was such a great conversation. Again, the show notes are at thefirstclick.net/176. So you can grab that coupon code that she has for you as well to try out Instrumental if that's something that's on your list. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen so you don't miss out on a single episode. And I'd love it if you'd leave me a little 5-star review, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts. And make sure you check out the video versions of these episodes at thefirstclick.net/YouTube. We'll see you in the next one.